Chief Strategist with BCA Research. Marko, good morning. Thank you for joining us. If you have to explain it to our viewers, which way the tariff negotiations are moving, how would you describe that? Confused, nothing happening there, or we are in for a shocker?
No, I don't think either of those three. I'm actually quite optimistic. I mean, President Trump keeps delaying the implementation of tariffs, which is a positive. He's clearly negotiating. Remember the situation on April 3rd after the April 2nd announcement. I mean, many of us were even wondering if the negotiations were the point or whether the reciprocal tariffs were supposed to just remain there. So I think the fact that the implementation date keeps moving and the fact that only 14 countries received those letters, those are all positives from the market's perspective.
Okay. Given that we already have what could be called as the tariff rate for Japan, China, and some other countries, and there seems to be a big departure in what was announced or indicated in the month of April versus where numbers are today in the month of July, do you see the final implementation could be much more diluted?
Yes. Absolutely. I fully expect both Japan and South Korea to ultimately produce deals. I expect fully that President Trump will announce an absolute victory and the greatest deals ever done. And that when we actually look at the numbers, we'll say, okay, they're marginally positive deals. They're not what we would call traditional trade deals. These aren't the kind of free trade agreements that take years to negotiate, but they'll all be relatively positive from a marginal perspective. Now, I do think that some country, whether it's Japan, South Korea, may have to have tariffs slapped on them. In other words, they may blow through the August deadline, and actually there could be a period where tariffs substantively increase. President Trump may require one or two sort of victims to prove that he is tough. But even in that case, I wouldn't be that negative. Ultimately, for me, what's really positive for the market is that somehow Europe and China, the two greatest trade partners of the US, aside from Mexico and Canada, have escaped this secondary round of tariffs. And actually, negotiations seem to be moving in a very positive direction. And that's very good and positive surprise.
Positive so far when it comes to tariffs, but Peter McGuire as well joins in on the show right now. Peter, not so great for copper though. I mean, almost double of what the consensus view was. It's a 50% tariff now. How does that go down?
Well, good morning, Aisha. I mean, we only have to look at the market and the impact that it's had. Naturally, COMEX record highs. You saw that, I think, surge as far as price. You're running at about $5.50 a pound in Shanghai now. So the overall momentum is certainly going to be higher prices from here. And it's, the early part of I think the absorption to the marketplace, where it trends. We know that copper demand is going to be very, very strong for the rest of this decade and into the next decade, from data centers, of course, construction. You're looking at automobiles, consumer electronics. The overall demand is going to be, I think, massive. And that's where President Trump, naturally, with the likes of Chile, Mexico, and Canada, as far as importing from. So I'm very conscious as far as his, I think, appetite, and is it only going to be 50%, or is he going to hit other metals as well?
But what is the playbook like for metals then? I mean, if he's going to hit other metal, or if the tariff is going to go higher on other metals, then indirectly it's the American consumer who will have to pay more. So how do you see the playbook moving?
Well, that's the issue. That's the issue, isn't it, Nikunj? I mean, how do you go as far as consumption, what the end cost is going to be naturally to the consumer, and how that's all going to be impacted naturally to an inflation story and overall, consumption. So we've just got to work through this. I'm sure that he's got his focus very much on rare earths and rare minerals as well. It'll be the next one off the cab and the next cab off the rank. And again, we've just got to see how this all works through for the rest of Q3 into Q4. Howard Lutnick's come out and said he certainly wants this in place by end of month or by the 1st of August as far as for those levies or tariffs to be introduced. So they're not sitting on their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Marko, I want to talk about, specific sectors and particularly on pharmaceuticals. The fact that Trump said that he will be announcing pharma and semiconductor tariffs soon, that's really going to sort of impact the global, trade, if you will. And he's threatened 200% on pharma. Do you think it's an eventuality, and would it really happen? Because there's been a lot of back and forth on what he plans to do with pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so the tariffs on copper don't really make sense to me, and maybe someone can explain this, but that's just going to raise prices to consumers. I don't see somehow like a return to 19th century, copper mining in the United States of America. Good luck with that. But pharma does make sense. Why? Because clearly American pharmaceutical corporations, this isn't really foreign, it's American. They've all basically moved to Ireland. And so Ireland has this very interesting situation where it's basically the fifth largest trade surplus with the US. Tiny Ireland, bigger than Canada's trade balance with the US. That is purely a product of tax sheltering by American corporates in Ireland. So I do expect that to definitely happen. I think that's going to be terrible for the US pharmaceutical companies. It's going to be negative for Ireland, but is it really going to redraw global supply chains? I don't think so. This is a specific tax shelter move by US corporates that has created this unnatural dynamic between tiny island of Ireland and the United States of America. It's also a huge part of America's trade imbalance. So by targeting pharma, President Trump does go after a specific sector that is sticking out like a sore thumb, and ultimately is going to hurt one country and American pharma sector. So it's not really something that I think is a macro event. It's more of a sectoral play in the US, and you should definitely be underweight US pharmaceuticals because of this.
Right. Okay. Marko, great to have you on the show. Peter, hang in there. We're going to discuss more on